The night of August 7th, 1943, Lieutenant Commander Robert Bully watched through salt-crusted binoculars as a Japanese destroyer passed within 800 yards of his position, its searchlights sweeping the black waters of Blackett Strait like the fingers of an indifferent god. The destroyer's crew had no idea that 77 feet of plywood powered by 3 Packard engines and carrying 4 Mark 8 torpedoes sat motionless in their shadow. They had learned to ignore these boats, these toys, as Imperial Navy captains called them, in intercepted communications. That contempt would prove fatal. The motor torpedo boat designation PT-109 represented everything the Japanese Navy had been trained to dismiss. Where their destroyers displaced 2,000 tons of steel armor, PT boats weighed barely 56,000 pounds fully loaded. Where their cruisers boasted 14-in guns, PT boats carried nothing heavier than 40mm cannon and twin 50-caliber machine guns. The Imperial Japanese Navy had ruled the Pacific since Pearl Harbor, with vessels that embodied industrial might and martial tradition stretching back centuries. These American boats, hastily constructed in boatyards from New Orleans to New York, seemed like children's toys set against the Emperor's fleet. Before we dive deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of tea or just some water, and sit back as we begin this journey together. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy, commanding PT-109 that August night, understood this contempt intimately. Over the preceding months, Japanese convoy commanders had established a predictable pattern. They steamed through the Solomon Islands' narrow passages at full speed, searchlights blazing, radio chatter uncoded, as if daring the Americans to challenge them. According to naval intelligence reports, declassified decades later, and cited in Robert Donovan's comprehensive study, PT-109, John F. Kennedy in World War II, Japanese destroyer captains regularly reported encounters with PT boats in their logs, with dismissive comments like mosquitoes observed or nuisance craft avoided. This institutional arrogance had infected the entire Tokyo Express supply run. The nighttime convoy route that sustained Japanese garrisons throughout the Solomon Islands chain. The American Navy's motor torpedo boat program had emerged from desperation rather than design. After Pearl Harbor stripped the Pacific Fleet of battleship supremacy, the Navy needed vessels that could harass Japanese shipping without requiring the massive industrial capacity tied up building fleet carriers and battleships. PT boats offered a solution: fast, cheap, and expendable. Elko Naval Division and Higgins Industries could produce them in weeks rather than years. But cheap and expendable also meant vulnerable and underestimated qualities that cut both ways. The crews who volunteered for PT duty represented a different breed of naval officer. They were younger, less bound by Naval Academy tradition, more willing to embrace unorthodox tactics. Kennedy himself, son of the former ambassador to Great Britain, had used family connections to secure sea duty after a back injury nearly disqualified him from service. His crew of 12 men averaged 23 years old. They trained in Melville, Rhode Island, where instructors emphasized one doctrine above all others: speed and surprise were their only armor. By mid-1943, the strategic situation in the Solomon Islands had reached a critical juncture. American forces had secured Guadalcanal after 6 months of brutal fighting, but Japanese garrisons on New Georgia, Kolombangara, and Bougainville remained supplied through the Tokyo Express runs. Every night, fast destroyer transports, nicknamed rat runs by American forces, raced down the slot, the narrow channel between island chains, delivering troops, ammunition, and food to isolated outposts. Stopping these convoys became paramount to Allied strategy in the South Pacific. Traditional naval doctrine suggested using submarines or surface action groups, cruisers and destroyers, operating in formation to interdict these supply lines. But submarines couldn't operate effectively in shallow coastal waters, and surface groups risked catastrophic losses in night actions, where Japanese expertise with long-range torpedoes and superior optics gave them decisive advantages. The Battle of Tacafaranga in November 1942 had proven this brutally. 1 American heavy cruiser sunk, 3 others damaged against minimal Japanese losses. This created an operational gap that PT boats theoretically could fill. They drew only 5 feet of water, allowing operations in coastal shallows where larger vessels couldn't venture. Their speed, 40 knots in calm seas, meant they could strike and withdraw before Japanese destroyers could bring superior firepower to bear. Their wooden construction made them nearly invisible to the magnetic torpedo exploders that Japanese submarines relied upon. But theory and practice diverged sharply in the volcanic darkness of the Solomon Islands, where squalls could reduce visibility to 0 in minutes, and coral reefs lurked inches beneath the surface. The Japanese Navy's contempt for PT boats rested on combat experience as much as cultural prejudice. In dozens of engagements throughout early 1943, PTB boats had launched hundreds of torpedoes with minimal confirmed kills. The Mark 8 torpedo, adapted from obsolete World War I designs, suffered from chronic depthing problems and faulty exploders. Japanese captains had watched these weapons run beneath their hulls or detonate prematurely so often that they'd stopped taking evasive action. This calculated dismissal would soon be reconsidered. The strategic geography of the Solomon Islands created what military planners designated as the slot, a 300-metre-long corridor of relatively deep water running northwest to southeast between parallel island chains. This natural highway became the Japanese Navy's lifeline to their southern garrisons and the America's primary interdiction target. By September 1943, the contest for control of these dark waters had evolved into a nightly ritual of cat and mouse that tested both sides' technological capabilities and tactical doctrine. Commander Thomas Warfield, operations officer for Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3, had spent 14 months studying Japanese convoy patterns from his headquarters on Tagi Island. His analysis, preserved and declassified after-action reports at the National Archives, revealed something remarkable. Despite varying their departure times from Rabaul and occasionally changing routes, Japanese convoys maintained rigid adherence to certain operational procedures. They traveled at exactly 26 knots regardless of weather conditions. They maintained radio silence only until spotted, then communicated freely. Most critically, their destroyer escorts always positioned themselves in a standard screening pattern, 2 destroyers forward, 1 aft, with transports in a tight formation between them. This predictability should have made them vulnerable, but the Japanese had calculated correctly that American PT boats lacked the firepower and coordination to exploit these patterns. Through mid-1943, Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3 had conducted 47 night patrols, resulting in only 3 confirmed hits on Japanese vessels, a success rate below 4%. The mathematics of naval warfare favored the Japanese. Even if PT boats achieved perfect positioning and launched all 4 torpedoes, the Mark 8 circular error probable meant only a 15% chance of hitting a destroyer-sized target at optimal range. Lieutenant Commander John Harley changed these calculations through an innovation so simple that peacetime naval officers had dismissed it as reckless wolfpack tactics. Rather than sending individual PT boats or pairs on independent patrols, Harley proposed concentrating 4 to 6 boats in coordinated strike groups. The concept borrowed from German U-boat operations in the Atlantic, adapted for surface craft operating in restricted waters. If executed properly, 6 PT boats could put 24 torpedoes into the water simultaneously, overwhelming Japanese destroyer screens through sheer volume of fire. The Navy brass at Kamsupak, Commander South Pacific Area Headquarters in Noumea, received Harley's proposal with institutional skepticism. Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, Amphibious Force Commander, considered PT boats useful primarily for screening operations and rescue missions, not offensive strikes against fleet units. His attitude reflected the broader naval establishment's view that these plywood craft represented a stopgap measure until proper destroyers and cruisers could be built in sufficient numbers. The proposal languished in administrative channels through July and August. Events forced Turner's hand. On the night of August 1st, 1943, PT-109 was rammed and sunk by the Japanese destroyer Amagiri in Blackett Strait. Kennedy and his surviving crew spent 6 days stranded on a small island before rescue, an ordeal that would later become legendary. But the immediate tactical lesson was undeniable. Individual PT boats operating in Japanese-controlled waters faced annihilation against alert destroyer crews. Something had to change. The turning point came from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Rand Westham, commanding PT 164, had scored one of the squadron's rare confirmed kills in July by using a tactic that violated every principle taught at the Melville Training Center. Instead of making a high-speed attack run and immediate withdrawal, the doctrine emphasized in training, Westham had cut his engines completely and allowed his boat to drift silently until the Japanese convoy passed within 400 yards. The shorter range compensated for torpedo defects. All 4 of his Mark 8s ran true, sinking a transport carrying over 600 troops. Westham's success contradicted accepted wisdom about PTB boat employment, but the numbers demanded attention. His kill per torpedo ratio was 25%, nearly double the theoretical maximum and 6 times the squadron average. When Harley analyzed Westham's tactics alongside his Wolfpack proposal, a new operational doctrine emerged. Multiple boats would establish ambush positions in narrow channels, running silent with engines idled, then launch masked torpedo attacks when Japanese convoys entered the kill zone. The combination of surprise, volume of fire, and close range might finally overcome the Mark Vapen's deficiencies. Implementation required solving several technical challenges. PT boat engines, 3 1.2-cylinder Packard motors generating 4,500 horsepower combined, could be heard for miles at full throttle. Their distinctive sound had become so recognizable that Japanese lookouts called them buzz saws. Running silent meant shutting down at least 2 of 3 engines, but doing so in strong currents or near coral reefs risked running aground. Crews needed to master a new skill set, reading currents in total darkness, calculating drift rates without power, and timing engine startups to achieve attack speed exactly when needed. Navigation presented even greater difficulties. The Solomon Islands lie near the equator, where there are no seasons to speak of, only periods of more or less intense rain. Cloud cover obscured stars on 60% of nights, eliminating celestial navigation. Radar sets installed on some PT boats had proven unreliable in tropical conditions, and their emissions could alert Japanese detection equipment. This forced crews to rely on dead reckoning and local knowledge, memorizing reef patterns, counting seconds between landmarks, feeling changes in swell direction that indicated proximity to land. Lieutenant Arthur Burnson, Squadron Intelligence Officer, contributed another crucial element: detailed analysis of moon phases and their impact on visibility. According to operational reports preserved in Samuel Eliot Morrison's Official History of U.S. Naval Operations, Burnson determined that Japanese convoys consistently chose nights with moon illumination above 30%, calculating that the increased visibility helped their lookouts spot PT boats more than it helped PT boats target convoys. He recommended scheduling American ambushes for the dark moon period each month, accepting reduced visibility in exchange for enhanced concealment. The final piece involved weapons modifications. Navy ordnance specialists at Tagi's forward base began adjusting torpedo depth settings, reducing the Mark 8's running depth from 12 feet to 8 feet. This increased the risk of premature detonation from wave action, but improved chances of hitting shallow draft transports and destroyer transports that Japanese convoys increasingly employed. They also reduced the safety arming distance from 400 yards to 250 yards, dangerous for PT boat crews, potentially fatal for Japanese targets. On the evening of October 6, 1943, 6 PT boats assembled at the Lambu staging area on the southern coast of Vela La Vela Island. This temporary forward base consisted of nothing more than a camouflaged fuel barge, ammunition dump, and radio shack operated by 3 radio men and a coast watcher. One of the Australian intelligence operatives who lived in the jungle monitoring Japanese movements. The boats had travelled separately from Tulagi over 2 days, hugging coastlines to avoid Japanese air patrols that still controlled daylight skies over the central Solomons. Lieutenant Commander Harley gathered his 6 boat commanders in the radio shack shortly after sunset. The briefing lasted 11 minutes. Intelligence indicated a major Japanese convoy designation, Reinforcement Group 7, would transit Vela Gulf that night, carrying supplies and reinforcements to the garrison on Kolombangara. Coast Watcher reports suggested 8 vessels, 4 transports, 2 destroyer transports, and 2 destroyer escorts. This represented one of the largest Tokyo Express runs attempted since September, when American success in the Treasury Islands operation had forced the Japanese to reduce convoy frequency. The attack plan reflected months of tactical evolution. The 6 PT boats would establish a picket line across the northern entrance to Veli Gulf, spacing themselves approximately 800 yards apart in a formation that resembled a naval barrier. Each boat would maintain position with only one engine running at idle speed, reducing acoustic signature by 70%. When the Japanese convoy entered the kill zone, all boats would launch their torpedoes simultaneously on Harley's radio signal, then withdraw at maximum speed through pre-plotted escape routes that navigated them around known reef systems. PT 166, commanded by Lieutenant Robert Shearer, would anchor the western end of the picket line closest to the Kolombangara shore, where water depth dropped to dangerous shallows. PT 164, with West Holme still commanding, took the eastern anchor position near the opposite shore. Harley's PT 168 positioned in the center, serving as the coordinator and backup if either flank collapsed. The remaining 3 boats, PT 54, PT 169, and PT 170, filled the gaps, creating overlapping fields of fire that theoretically guaranteed at least 8 torpedoes would pass through any point where the Japanese formation steamed. The plan's elegance masked its fragility. Success depended on the Japanese maintaining their standard formation and speed. If they altered course by more than 15 degrees, the entire ambush line would become misaligned. If they detected the PT boats before entering the kill zone, their destroyers would circle behind the American positions and destroy them systematically with superior gun batteries. If the torpedoes malfunctioned at their usual rate, the attack would achieve nothing while revealing American tactics for future Japanese countermeasures. At 2000 hours, the 6 boats departed Lambu Lambu at 5-minute intervals. They ran without running lights, relying on carefully memorized compass headings and stopwatch timing to reach their assigned positions. The night offered partial moon obscured by broken cloud. Not ideal, but acceptable. Sea state registered at 2 feet with light chop from a southeastern breeze that carried the smell of volcanic sulfur from nearby Kolombangara's still active crater. Temperature held at 83 degrees Fahrenheit, typical for October in the equatorial Pacific. Lieutenant John Claggett, executive officer on PT 168, recorded in his personal log, later archived at the Naval History and Heritage Command, that the transit to the ambush position achieved what crews had started calling combat stillness. The Packard engines, throttled down to barely above stall speed, produced a deep rumble rather than their usual shriek. Bow waves subsided to gentle ripples. Crew members moved carefully to avoid metallic sounds that carried across water with startling clarity. Gunners checked their .50 caliber ammunition feeds for the 3rd time, though they knew they wouldn't fire unless the torpedoes failed completely. Tracers would reveal their positions and invite devastating counterfire. By 2100 hours, all 6 boats had reached their assigned positions. They formed an invisible fence across Veligul's northern entrance, a stretch of water approximately 4,000 yards wide, with navigable depth ranging from 20 to 60 fathoms. Each crew settled into the peculiar tension of ambush warfare, alert but motionless, watching for targets they might not see until too late to react. Lookouts scanned their assigned sectors, using binoculars that had been adjusted for night vision, a modification that reduced magnification but enhanced light gathering. The weight tested both discipline and nerve. Standard Japanese transit time from Rabaul to Kolombangara required approximately 6 hours at convoy speed, but weather, mechanical issues, or tactical decisions could delay arrival by hours. The PT boats carried fuel for roughly 10 hours of operations, including high-speed maneuvering, but maintaining position against current drain reserves steadily. Harley had calculated they could hold station until 0200 hours before fuel considerations forced withdrawal. After that, they'd lack sufficient reserves for the high-speed escape the plan required. Midnight passed with no contact. The moon set at 0030 hours, plunging Veligul into near-total darkness, broken only by bioluminescent plankton, disturbed by the boat's minimal movement. This phosphorescence, a common phenomenon in tropical waters, could betray position if a boat moved too quickly. Crew members began exhibiting the physiological signs of sustained alertness, elevated pulse rates, slight tremors, heightened startle response. Combat fatigue could degrade performance as surely as enemy action. Harley monitored his own symptoms carefully, knowing his judgment would determine whether the mission succeeded or ended in catastrophe. At 0115 hours, Shearer's lookout on PT 166 spotted the first indication of contact, a change in the wave pattern to the northwest, suggesting large vessels displacing significant water. 5 minutes later, West Holmes' radar operator on PT 164 picked up intermittent returns at maximum range, approximately 12,000 yards. The returns, size and number matched intelligence predictions. 8 vessels in standard convoy formation. The Japanese were coming, and they were coming exactly as expected. Harley keyed his radio transmitter 3 times in rapid succession, the prearranged signal, meaning contact confirmed. Maintain ambush positions. The next 20 minutes unfolded with agonizing slowness. Japanese convoys typically traveled at 26 knots, covering roughly 800 yards per minute, but radar returns suggested this group was moving faster, perhaps 30 knots. Either they'd received warning of American activity or urgency to reach Kolombangara had prompted their commander to increase speed. The faster pace compressed the timeline, giving PT crews less time to verify targeting solutions and react to unexpected developments. It also meant relative closure speed during torpedo runs would increase, raising collision risks if any boat mistimed its escape maneuver. At 0138 hours on the morning of October 7th, 1943, the lead Japanese destroyer silhouette materialized against the northern horizon like a blade emerging from shadow. Quartermaster 2nd-Das Raymond Jenkins aboard PT-68 spotted it first, calling contact bearing 355 degrees at approximately 4,000 yards. Through his binoculars, he could distinguish the distinctive pagoda-style superstructure that characterized Fubuki-class destroyers. Behind the lead destroyer, at staggered intervals, the shapes of additional vessels began resolving from the darkness. Harley faced an immediate decision that would determine the attack's outcome. Standard doctrine dictated waiting until targets entered optimal torpedo range between 800 and 1,200 yards before launching. But the Japanese formation's higher-than-expected speed meant they would transit through the kill zone in approximately 90 seconds, rather than the 2 minutes his calculations had assumed. Waiting for optimal range risked letting the convoy pass through before all boats could fire. Launching early increased miss probability but ensured all 6 boats could engage. He chose the aggressive option. At 0140 hours, when the lead destroyer reached 2,500 yards from the picket line center, Harley transmitted the attack order. 3 short radio clicks followed by 2 long ones. Across 4,000 yards of darkness, 18 Pints boat crew members simultaneously initiated launch sequences for 24 Mark 8 torpedoes. The decision compressed years of naval tactical evolution into a single moment of coordinated violence. PT 166 Shearer fired first, launching all 4 torpedoes at 15-second intervals toward the convoy's western flank. His targeting solution aimed not at the lead destroyer, too heavily armored and alert, but at the transport vessels following in its wake. The Mark 8 torpedoes, each carrying 666 pounds of TNT explosive, slipped into the water with distinctive splashes the Japanese lookouts should have detected. But the convoy's high speed and the destroyer's focus on forward sectors created a blind spot of stern of the escorts where Shearer's weapons tracked. The success of West Holmes' PT-164 attack would later be studied at the Naval War College as a case study in aggressive smallboat tactics. Rather than maintaining his anchor position on the eastern flank, West Holmes had crept 200 yards closer to the convoy's projected course, violating his orders but improving his targeting geometry. When Harley's launch signal came, West Holmes' boat sat at just under 900 yards from the nearest transport, nearly point-blank range for torpedo warfare. He ripple-fired all 4 weapons in 20 seconds, then immediately brought his 3 engines to full power. The tactical gamble of coordinated fire became apparent within 90 seconds of launch. 24 torpedoes, running at 46 knots, created a moving barrier of explosive potential across the Japanese convoy's path. Even accounting for the Mark 8's dismal reliability record, simple probability suggested multiple hits. The Japanese commander aboard the lead destroyer, Captain Tamichihara, whose memoir Japanese Destroyer Captain would later provide invaluable enemy perspective on this engagement, reported that his lookout spotted the first torpedo wakes at approximately 60 seconds before impact. Hara's response demonstrated the combat experience that made Japanese destroyer captains formidable opponents. He immediately ordered full right rudder and increased speed to flank emergency, attempting to comb the torpedo tracks by presenting his vessel's narrowest profile. His emergency maneuver broke the convoy's formation as following vessels scattered to avoid collision with the lead destroyer's sudden turn. This disorganization, while saving Hara's ship, ensured that multiple transports presented their vulnerable broadsides to the oncoming weapons. The first explosion occurred at 0142 hours and 15 seconds. According to multiple witness accounts compiled by the Naval Historical Center, a massive underwater detonation lifted the stern of the transport Shinsei Maru No. 3 clear of the water, breaking the vessel's keel and causing catastrophic flooding. The ship, displacing 4,200 tons and carrying 800 tons of ammunition plus 640 soldiers, began sinking by the stern within minutes. Survivors would later report that secondary explosions from the ammunition cargo accelerated the vessel's destruction. 3 more explosions followed in rapid succession, each separated by roughly 10 seconds, a timing pattern that suggested multiple torpedoes from the same PT boat finding their marks against a single target. The transport Yamayuri Maru, a converted passenger liner pressed into military service, took at least 2 hits amidships. Eyewitnesses on other Japanese vessels reported seeing the ship's superstructure lift and twist as internal bulkheads failed. The Yamayuri Maru carried primarily food supplies and replacement troops rather than ammunition, which paradoxically ensured more men survived the initial hits, but faced drowning as the ship settled rapidly by the bow. Harley's PT-168, positioned in the picket line center, achieved what post-battle analysis suggested was the attack's most effective fire solution. His 4 torpedoes, launched at a slightly different bearing than the flanking boats, intersected the Japanese formation after it had begun its emergency maneuvers. This meant his weapons struck vessels already attempting evasive action and therefore presenting unpredictable aspects. One of PT-168's torpedoes hit the destroyer transport Satsuki, a warship modified to carry troops by removing half its torpedo tubes and adding troop berthing spaces. The Satsuki strike illustrated both the Mark I's limitations and its potential when properly employed. The torpedo struck forward of the destroyer transport's bridge, but its magnetic exploder, designed to detonate beneath a target's keel, functioned erratically. Instead of breaking the ship's back, the explosion created a massive hole in the forward hull that flooded 3 compartments, but left the vessel mobile. The Satsuki's commander maintained enough control to beach his damaged ship on Kolombangara's shore, saving his vessel, but removing it from combat effectiveness for the remainder of the war. What Japanese records would later describe as the attack's most devastating moment came when PT-154, commanded by Lieutenant Henry Brantingham, achieved a nearly impossible targeting solution. His 4 torpedoes fired at the transport Kenryumaru caught the vessel in a nightmare scenario, 2 hits amidships on opposite sides occurring within seconds of each other. The simultaneous double impact created compression shock waves that essentially crushed the transport's central structure. The Ken Maru broke in half and sank in less than 3 minutes, giving its cargo of engineering equipment and nearly 400 personnel almost no time to abandon ship. The entire torpedo barrage lasted approximately 4 minutes from first launch to last explosion. In that brief span, the coordinated PT boat attack achieved what 6 months of individual patrols had failed to accomplish. The simultaneous destruction of multiple major vessels in a single engagement, but the attack's success triggered immediate and violent Japanese response. The surviving destroyer escorts, shocked from their dismissive complacency, turned their full attention to hunting the audacious plywood boats that had savaged their convoy. Captain Hara's lead destroyer, having avoided the initial torpedo barrage through aggressive maneuvering, came about and began searching for PT boat wakes. His 3-in guns, superior to anything the American boats mounted, could destroy a PT in 2 or 3 hits. His searchlights, which he'd kept dark during the initial transit, now blazed across the water seeking targets. The Japanese destroyer's speed advantage, capable of 38 knots versus the PTB boat's maximum 40, meant it could overtake any American boat that hadn't achieved substantial lead distance during the initial escape phase. West Holmes' PT 164, having closed to dangerously short range before firing, found itself in immediate peril. His aggressive positioning meant he'd fired from less than 900 yards, well inside the range where Japanese destroyers could bring effective fire. As his engines roared to full power, generating their distinctive high-pitched shriek, Hara's searchlight swept across his stern. The first salvo from the Japanese destroyer's forward guns landed 50 yards short, but walked toward PT 164's position with the steady correction of experienced gun crews. The escape phase tested PT boat design limitations and crew courage equally. At 40 knots, the boat's plywood hulls pounded across wavetops with impacts that could crack ribs and knock teeth loose. Steering at high speed in darkness near coral reefs required navigation by instinct and memory rather than charts or instruments. One miscalculation would impale a 77-foot boat on coral formations that rose from deep water without warning. Yet slowing meant certain destruction from the pursuing Japanese destroyers. Lieutenant West Holmes' PT 164 carved a desperate path through Veligul's treacherous waters as Japanese searchlights probed the darkness behind him. His helmsman, motor machinist mate, First Class William Patterson, held the wheel in a death grip while West Holme called course corrections from memory. 5 degrees port to clear a reef system charted during previous patrols. Then 15 degrees starboard to thread between 2 coral heads that rose to within 8 feet of the surface. At 41 knots, they covered a nautical mile every 87 seconds, but the pursuing destroyer gained steadily. The Japanese gun crews found their range at 0147 hours. A 3-in shell screamed over PT 164's port side, close enough that the pressure wave from its passage rattled equipment and sent spray across the deck. West Holmes' gunners returned fire with their twin 50-caliber machine guns, a gesture more defiant than tactically sound, since the armor-piercing rounds merely sparked off the destroyer's steel plating. But the tracers served another purpose. They revealed PT 164's position to the other American boats, allowing them to vector their escapes away from the pursuit zone. Harley aboard PT 168 made a split-second tactical decision that exemplified the aggressive mindset that differentiated successful PT commanders from merely competent ones. Rather than fleeing south toward the relative safety of American-controlled waters, he turned north directly toward the burning Japanese transports. His logic sound, despite appearing suicidal, recognized that Japanese destroyers would concentrate their search patterns along the southern escape routes. By heading into the heart of the damaged convoy, PT 168 might slip through the chaos, while enemy attention focused elsewhere. The gambit succeeded partly through luck, partly through Japanese confusion. The waters around the sinking transports had become a nightmare of burning oil, debris, and hundreds of men struggling in the water. Destroyer escorts faced an impossible dilemma: pursue the American attackers or rescue survivors from the transports. Japanese naval doctrine emphasized offensive action over defensive rescue, but the screams of drowning soldiers created moral pressure that affected commanders differently. One destroyer continued pursuit southward, while the other turned to rescue operations, splitting their force and reducing the threat to escaping PT boats. PT 166, Scherer's boat on the western flank, encountered a different challenge. His escape route took him close to Kolombangara's coastline, where Japanese shore batteries had been reported but never confirmed. At 0150 hours, those batteries confirmed their existence dramatically. A 75mm shell exploded 30 yards off PT 166's starboard bow, sending coral fragments and shrapnel across the deck. 2 crew members received minor wounds, one from shrapnel in his thigh, another from flying coral that gashed his forearm, but the boat remained operational. Shearer's response illustrated the improvisational tactics PT crews developed through necessity. He steered directly toward the shore battery's flash signature, closing to within 600 yards, close enough to bring his 40mm deck gun into effective range. His gunner, Fire Controlman Second Arse Anthony Marinelli, pumped 12 rounds toward the battery's position while the boat raced past at 40 knots. The shore battery didn't fire again, either destroyed or sufficiently discouraged to hold fire against a fast-moving target that would be out of range in seconds. The coordination between the 6 PT boats during their escape phase revealed the sophisticated radio discipline they developed through months of operations. Harley maintained tactical command through a series of coded clicks and brief voice transmissions lasting less than 2 seconds. Too short for Japanese direction, finding equipment to locate with precision, but sufficient to coordinate movement. At 0153 hours, all 6 boats reported clear of immediate pursuit, though Japanese destroyers continued searching the Gulf for another 40 minutes. As PT-168 cleared the northern end of Veligal, Harley's radar operator picked up a contact that shouldn't have existed, a small vessel dead in the water approximately 3,000 yards northwest of the main battle area. Analysis of the radar return suggested something roughly the size of a PT boat, possibly one of his own disabled during the attack. Harley faced another command decision: investigate the contact and risk encountering Japanese forces, or continue his escape and potentially abandon American sailors. He altered course toward the contact, reducing speed to 20 knots to lower engine noise and improve sonar conditions. As PT-168 closed to within 800 yards, lookouts identified the vessel as neither American nor Japanese. It was a native canoe, approximately 30 feet long, carrying what appeared to be Japanese survivors from one of the sunken transports. The occupants, visible in the reflected glow from burning oil on the water, made no hostile moves. Harley circled once a distance, confirmed they posed no threat, and resumed his escape course. The rules of engagement didn't require rescue of enemy personnel, particularly when doing so would risk his own crew and boat. Lieutenant Brantingham's PT-154 experienced the most harrowing escape. His attack position in the picket line had placed him directly in the path of the convoy's scattering formation. When he launched torpedoes and attempted to turn south, a Japanese transport, damaged but still under power, inadvertently blocked his escape route. Brantingham had 3 options: reduce speed and circle around the transport stern, attempt to pass ahead of the vessel at full speed, or hold position and hope the transport passed by quickly enough to clear his escape path. He chose aggression. PT-54 surged forward at maximum throttle, aiming to cross the transport's bow with roughly 200 yards of clearance. The maneuver required precise calculation of both vessels' speeds and courses. Mathematics. Brantingham performed mentally in seconds while under fire from the transport's defensive machine guns. His calculation proved correct by a margin of approximately 40 yards. PT-154 crossed the transport's bow close enough that crew members could see Japanese sailors on the forecastle, some attempting to bring additional weapons to bear, others simply staring at the audacious American boat racing past. The incident illustrated a phenomenon that would appear repeatedly in after-action reports. Japanese sailors and officers trained to engage fleet units with heavy weapons often hesitated when confronting small boats at close range. The psychological gap between firing torpedoes at a destroyer from 8,000 yards and shooting machine guns at a plywood boat 50 yards away created reaction delays that PT crews exploited repeatedly. This wasn't cowardice. Japanese naval personnel had proven their courage countless times, but rather a disruption of trained response patterns when confronted with an unconventional threat. By 0 to 15 hours, all 6 PT boats had cleared Vela Gulf and rendezvoused at a predetermined coordinate 30 miles south of the battle area. Damage assessment revealed remarkably light losses. 2 men wounded on PT-166, minor shrapnel damage to PT-54's starboard engine cowling, and several bullet holes in various boats' superstructures from Japanese machine gun fire. No boats had been lost, no crew members killed. Against this minimal cost, the attack had sunk at least 4 confirmed Japanese transports, with high confidence of additional kills pending reconnaissance confirmation. The boats refueled from a hidden cache on the southern coast of Vella La Vella, the emergency supply point established specifically for deep penetration patrols. Crew members transferred fuel by hand pump from 5 5-gallon drums, a laborious process requiring nearly an hour. During this vulnerable period, they maintained strict noise discipline and posted guards against possible Japanese retaliation patrols. The refueling location's remoteness provided some security, but everyone understood that Japanese forces, stung by the night's losses, would be searching aggressively for the attackers. Lieutenant Claggett, still serving as Harley's executive officer, used the refueling pause to compile preliminary battle reports from each boat commander. The process revealed discrepancies typical of night combat. Some commanders reported torpedo hits that others hadn't observed. Estimated ranges varied by hundreds of yards, and timing of key events differed by several minutes between accounts. These inconsistencies weren't lies or exaggerations, but honest reporting of experiences shaped by adrenaline, darkness, and the fractured perception that combat creates. Reconciling these accounts into accurate after-action reports would require days of analysis. The return voyage to Tagi began at 0430 hours. Time to ensure the boats reached American-controlled waters before dawn brought Japanese air patrols. The 60 mi transit took nearly 4 hours at economical cruising speed, during which crew members began processing what they'd experienced. Combat affects individuals differently. Some became talkative, reliving every moment in detailed narrative, while others went silent, staring at the water with expressions that suggested they were still seeing burning ships and drowning men. The 6 PT boats arrived at Tulagi's motor torpedo boat base at 0820 hours on October 7, 1943, to find the base already aware of their success. Coast Watcher intelligence networks had intercepted frantic Japanese radio traffic reporting the convoy's destruction. One particularly valuable intercept, decoded by CRIP analysts at the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, contained a message from the Kolombangara garrison commander to his headquarters in Rabaul. Reinforcement Group 7 attacked by enemy surface units. 4 transports confirmed sunk. 2 damaged escort commander requests immediate air support to hunt American destroyers. The last phrase revealed something significant. Japanese forces had attributed the attack to American destroyers rather than PT boats. This misidentification reflected not stupidity, but the ingrained assumption that only fleet units could inflict such devastating losses. The Imperial Navy's institutional dismissal of PT boats had blinded them to the actual threat, creating an intelligence gap that American forces could exploit for future operations. Commander Warfield immediately recognized the strategic value of this misconception and recommended maintaining operational security to preserve the Japanese belief that destroyers, not PT boats, had conducted the raid. Rear Admiral Theodore Wilkinson, who had replaced Admiral Turner as commander of the 3rd Amphibious Force in July, arrived at Tulagi by seaplane on the afternoon of October 7th to personally debrief the boat commanders. Wilkinson represented a different generation of naval leadership, more willing to embrace unconventional tactics and less bound by the battleship-centric doctrine that dominated pre-war Naval Academy training. His presence signaled that senior leadership now viewed PT boat operations as potentially decisive rather than merely supplementary to fleet actions. The formal debriefing lasted 7 hours and involved not just the boat commanders, but also key crew members whose technical observations might illuminate what had worked and what required improvement. Wilkinson's questioning focused particularly on torpedo performance, recognizing that the Mark 8's reliability remained the critical variable determining PT boat effectiveness. Lieutenant Westholm's report proved especially valuable. Of his 4 torpedoes launched at near optimal range against stationary targets, all 4 had run true to their aiming points, though only 2 had detonated successfully. The 50% detonation rate, while still disappointing, represented substantial improvement over previous missions, where failure rates often exceeded 75%. The intelligence section's analysis, compiled over subsequent days and preserved in declassified documents at the Naval History and Heritage Command, concluded that the October 7th attack had sunk 4 Japanese transports with a combined displacement of approximately 14,000 tons, damaged 2 additional vessels severely enough to remove them from service for months, and killed or drowned an estimated 1,200 Japanese personnel. The material loss hurt Japan's logistics network in the Central Solomons. The personnel loss hurt even more. Trained soldiers took months to produce and transport to forward areas, and Japan's shrinking merchant fleet made replacement increasingly difficult. More significant than the immediate tactical success was the operational precedent the attack established. PT boat doctrine had evolved from individual harassment raids to coordinated strike operations capable of achieving fleet-level results with minimal resource investment. 6 PT boats costing roughly $75,000 each to construct had destroyed vessels and cargo worth millions, while killing more enemy personnel than some battalion-sized ground operations achieved in weeks of fighting. The cost-exchange ratio demanded attention from planners increasingly concerned about America's ability to sustain offensive operations across the vast Pacific theater. Lieutenant Commander Harley's operational report, written 2 days after the attack, when exhaustion no longer clouded his judgment, identified several critical factors that had enabled success. First, accurate intelligence from Coast Watcher networks had provided precise information about convoy composition, route, and timing. Second, careful site selection had positioned PT boats in narrow waters, where Japanese maneuverability advantages diminished. Third, coordinated fire from multiple boats had overcome individual torpedo unreliability through volume. Fourth, aggressive leadership at the boat commander level had compensated for doctrine that remained overly cautious in some respects. His report also identified failures and near disasters that luck, rather than planning, had resolved. The radio coordination system, while functional, had experienced several near breakdowns when atmospheric interference disrupted transmissions. Several boats had nearly collided during the chaotic escape phase due to inadequate deconliction of retreat routes. Most seriously, the attack had succeeded partly because Japanese forces had been unprepared. A repeat operation against alert defenders might produce very different outcomes. Harley recommended against attempting to replicate the October 7th tactics without modifications addressing these vulnerabilities. The Japanese response to the attack evolved over subsequent weeks in ways that Allied intelligence monitored carefully. Initially, as the destroyer misattribution suggested, Japanese commanders increased destroyer escorts for subsequent Tokyo Express runs and instituted more aggressive patrolling of approach routes. These measures addressed the threat they believed they faced, but did little to counter actual PT boat capabilities. By late October, however, Japanese forces had begun deploying dedicated anti-PT boat patrols, small, fast sub-chasers equipped with searchlights and automatic weapons, specifically tasked with hunting the plywood boats. Captain Hara, whose destroyer had survived the October 7th attack, submitted a detailed after-action report that Japanese naval archives preserved and that American researchers accessed after the war. His analysis proved remarkably accurate despite his initial misidentification of the attackers. Hara concluded that the attack had succeeded primarily through surprise and coordination, that the attacking force had demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of Japanese operational patterns, and that future convoys required either stronger escorts or route modifications to avoid predictable transit lanes. His recommendations influenced Japanese tactical doctrine for the remainder of the Solomons campaign. The broader strategic context made the October 7th attack's significance extend beyond its immediate tactical results. By autumn 1943, the Pacific War had reached a critical juncture where American industrial production was beginning to overwhelm Japanese capacity to replace losses. Every transport sunk, every destroyer damaged, every trained soldier drowned, represented irreplaceable resources for Japan's shrinking empire. The United States could afford to trade PT boats for transports indefinitely. Japan could not sustain such exchanges. This asymmetry, more than any single battle's outcome, determined the war's trajectory. The media response to the attack, carefully managed by Navy public relations officers, emphasized American tactical innovation and crew heroism while avoiding specific details that might compromise operational security. Newspaper accounts published in November, after sufficient time had passed to ensure the Japanese couldn't exploit the information, described the attack in terms that celebrated small boat courage against overwhelming odds. These stories served multiple purposes: maintaining civilian morale, encouraging PT boat recruitment, and demonstrating to allies that American forces could successfully engage Japanese naval power despite the Pacific Fleet continuing recovery from Pearl Harbor. One account published in the New York Times on November 19, 1943, quoted an unnamed senior Pacific naval officer, describing the attack as proof that American ingenuity and aggressive spirit could overcome material disadvantages through superior tactics and coordination. The article never mentioned PT boats specifically, referring instead to light naval forces and coastal patrol craft, maintaining the operational security that kept Japanese intelligence uncertain about the actual threat they faced. This careful information management extended the psychological advantage gained through Japanese misattribution of the attack. Individual crew members received recognition appropriate to their contributions. Harley received the Navy Cross, the service's second highest decoration, for his planning and execution of the coordinated attack. Westholme received a Silver Star for his aggressive positioning that achieved multiple torpedo hits. Several other crew members received Bronze Stars or Letters of Commendation. These awards served not just to recognize individual valor, but to signal throughout the PT boat squadrons that innovative tactics and calculated risk-taking would receive institutional support rather than censure. The awards ceremony, conducted on Tagi in mid-November, with minimal publicity, also served as a memorial for PT boat crews lost in other operations during the same period. While the October 7th attack had succeeded without American casualties, other patrols that month had resulted in the loss of 2 PT boats and 17 crew members to various causes. One boat destroyed by Japanese air attack while returning to base. Another lost when it struck a reef at high speed during a night engagement. These losses reminded everyone that PT-BBO operations remained extraordinarily dangerous despite tactical improvements. The success of the October 7th attack triggered immediate demand from higher headquarters for its replication across the Solomon Islands theater. Admiral William Holley, commanding the South Pacific area, personally directed that Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3 develop training programs to disseminate Wolfpack tactics throughout all PT squadrons, operating in his area of responsibility. This directive, issued on October 15, 1943, launched a rapid expansion of coordinated PT boat operations that would characterize the remainder of the Solomons campaign and influence Pacific War smallboat tactics through the conflict's end. Implementation proved more challenging than Holley's directive anticipated. The October 7th attack had succeeded partly through specific geographic conditions, narrow waters limiting Japanese maneuver options, detailed knowledge of local reef systems enabling safe high-speed operations, and coaster intelligence providing precise convoy information. Replicating these conditions elsewhere required extensive preparation that couldn't be rushed without courting disaster. Commander Warfield, tasked with developing the training program, estimated that properly preparing a PT squadron for coordinated operations required minimum 6 weeks of intensive rehearsal. The training regimen Warfield developed, documented in training manuals preserved at the Surface Warfare Officer School Command, emphasized several core competencies. First, radio discipline and communications procedures that enabled coordination while minimizing electromagnetic signature. Second, navigation techniques for high-speed operations in restricted waters, including dead reckoning, radar interpretation, and celestial navigation under combat conditions. Third, torpedo attack geometry, focusing on deflection angles, range estimation, and optimal firing positions. Fourth, evasion tactics for escaping after attacks, including smoke deployment, high-speed maneuvering, and deception techniques. Lieutenant Westholme became the training program's primary instructor for attack tactics, drawing on his successful October 7th execution. His teaching methodology emphasized aggressive positioning over conservative safety, arguing that PTB boats' survival depended more on achieving quick kills that disrupted Japanese formations than on maintaining safe standoff distances. This philosophy contradicted peacetime training that had prioritized boat preservation, but combat results validated Westholme's approach. His classes attracted standing-room-only attendance from PT boat officers, eager to learn tactics that actually worked. The first squadron to complete the new training regimen was Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 9, recently arrived from the United States and equipped with newer Higgins-built boats featuring improved radar and upgraded armament. Squadron 9's commander, Lieutenant Commander Robert Leon, had studied Harley's after-action reports extensively and proposed modifications to the Wolfpack concept. Rather than establishing a static picket line, Leon suggested a mobile hunting formation where PT boats maintained communications while patrolling assigned sectors, concentrating rapidly when contact was made. This pack attack variant offered greater flexibility but required more sophisticated coordination. Squadron 9's first combat application of these tactics came on the night of November 2nd, 1943, when 4 of its boats intercepted a Japanese convoy northeast of Bougainville. The attack, while not achieving the dramatic success of October 7th, demonstrated that the tactics could be executed by crews with less experience operating in different geographic conditions. Squadron 9 sank 2 transports and damaged a third while losing no boats, though one PT sustained significant damage from Japanese return fire and required extensive repair. The engagement validated that October 7th represented repeatable doctrine rather than unrepeatable luck. The Japanese response evolved as they recognized the pattern of coordinated small boat attacks. By mid-November, Tokyo Express convoys began incorporating specialized anti-PT boat defenses, searchlight-equipped sub-chasers, float planes dropping flares to illuminate ambush zones, and destroyer tactics modified to specifically counter small boat swarm attacks. These countermeasures reduced but didn't eliminate PT boat effectiveness. The naval campaign in the Solomons had become a continuous cycle of tactical innovation and counter-innovation, with each side adapting to neutralize the other's latest advantage. Intelligence analysis revealed that Japanese naval logistics had been disrupted significantly by the sustained PT boat campaign. Documents captured during the Treasury Islands operation in late October contained orders from Rabaul headquarters complaining about supply delivery failures and demanding explanations for why convoys repeatedly suffered losses to small craft raids. The document's tone suggested that senior Japanese commanders had begun recognizing PT boats as a serious threat rather than a nuisance, though their tactical adjustment still lagged behind the threat's actual capabilities. One captured document proved particularly valuable. A tactical directive from Vice Admiral Tomoshige Samuyama, commanding Japanese naval forces in the Central Solomons, ordering convoy commanders to treat all contacts with extreme caution regardless of apparent vessel size. The directive's language indicated that Samuyama had realized American forces were using unconventional craft for fleet-level strikes. His order for increased caution implicitly acknowledged that the Japanese Navy's previous dismissal of PT boats had been a costly error. American intelligence officers studying the document recognized that psychological victory often preceded material victory. The Japanese Navy now feared waters they had previously dominated. The escalating PT boat campaign created unintended consequences for other Allied operations. As Japanese convoys rerouted to avoid known PT boat patrol areas or increased escorts at the expense of cargo capacity, their garrisons throughout the Solomons began experiencing supply shortages. American ground forces advancing through New Georgia and later Bougainville found Japanese defenders increasingly hampered by ammunition shortages, reduced rations, and medical supply deficits. PT boat operations, intended primarily to sink ships, were achieving strategic effects by degrading enemy ground combat capability. Lieutenant Commander Harley's role evolved from tactical commander to strategic planner, as senior leadership recognized his understanding of PT boat potential and limitations. In early November, Admiral Halley's staff brought Harley to Noumea to contribute to planning for Operation Cartwheel, the upcoming campaign to isolate Rabaul by capturing surrounding island bases. Harley's input focused on how PT boat squadrons could support amphibious landings by interdicting Japanese reinforcement attempts and evacuating reconnaissance teams. His recommendations influenced operational plans throughout the Central and Northern Solomons. The material demands of expanded PT boat operations strained logistics networks. Each PT boat required approximately 1,200 gal of high-octane aviation gasoline per patrol, plus regular maintenance, including engine overhauls every 100 operating hours. Torpedoes in chronically short supply throughout the Pacific needed replenishment faster than industrial production could provide. Ammunition for the boats increasingly heavy defensive armament. Some boats now mounting 240mm and 450 caliber guns consumed stockpiles originally intended for shore installations. Supply officers struggled to balance PTB boat requirements against competing demands from air squadrons, submarine forces, and surface fleets. Innovation extended beyond tactics to technical modifications that improved PT boat combat effectiveness. Base workshops began adding improvised upgrades, radar reflectors designed to confuse Japanese fire control systems, smoke generators for creating concealment during daylight operations, and modified mufflers that reduced engine noise without significantly impacting performance. Some of these modifications came from official channels, but many represented field expedients developed by crew members applying practical experience to technical problems. The Navy's relatively informal PT boat culture encouraged this bottom-up innovation in ways the more rigid fleet structure often discouraged. Personnel management became increasingly important as PT boat operations intensified. Combat fatigue affected crews who routinely operated at night under high stress with inadequate rest between patrols. Medical officers began documenting symptoms similar to those observed in submarine crews: insomnia, heightened startle response, difficulty concentrating, and in severe cases, combat stress reactions that rendered individuals unable to continue duty. Squadron commanders implemented rotation policies attempting to balance operational demands against crew welfare, but the chronic shortage of experienced personnel made adequate rest difficult to provide. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy, having survived PT 109's sinking and subsequent rescue ordeal, returned to duty in November commanding PT 59, which had been converted to a gunboat configuration. His experience illustrated both PTO culture's resilience and its challenges. Kennedy's leadership had saved his crew after the sinking, earning him the Navy and Marine Corps Medal and reinforcing his reputation as a capable commander. But the incident had also highlighted the dangers inherent in PT boat operations and the thin margin between success and disaster that crews navigated nightly. Kennedy's return to combat duty demonstrated the aggressive mindset that characterized successful PT boat officers. By late November 1943, motor torpedo boat operations in the Solomons had evolved into a mature campaign with established doctrine, proven tactics, and institutional support from senior leadership. The initial skepticism that had greeted PT boats when they first deployed to the Pacific had been replaced by recognition that small combatants, properly employed, could achieve strategic effects disproportionate to their size and cost. This recognition would influence American naval planning for subsequent Pacific campaigns, particularly in the Philippines, where PT boat squadrons would eventually expand to include dozens of boats operating in coordinated groups. The tactical success of coordinated PT boat operations in the Solomons resonated throughout the Pacific theater, with consequences extending far beyond immediate battle results. By December 1943, the U.S. Navy had approved construction contracts for an additional 60 pints boats specifically intended for Wolfpack operations, with modifications incorporating lessons learned from the October 7th attack and subsequent engagements. These new boats featured improved radar systems, upgraded engines producing an additional 500 horsepower, and reinforced hull structures capable of sustaining higher speeds in rough seas. Admiral Ernest King, serving as Chief of Naval Operations in Washington, received detailed briefings about Solomon's PT boat operations during his December visit to Pearl Harbor. King, known for his skepticism toward unproven concepts, had initially opposed significant investment in PT boats, viewing them as resources diverted from fleet construction. The battle reports changed his assessment. According to declassified minutes from conferences held at Pacific Fleet headquarters, King directed the Bureau of Ships to prioritize PT boat construction and authorized requisitioning additional Packard engines from Army Air Force's production runs, despite protests from Army commanders who wanted those engines for bombers. The bureaucratic victory represented by King's support enabled expansion that had been administratively impossible months earlier. By early 1944, PT boat squadrons would be operating in every major Pacific theater: the Solomons, New Guinea, the Philippines, and eventually the Japanese home islands. Each squadron adapted wolfpack tactics to local conditions, creating variations that enriched the doctrine while maintaining its core principles of coordination, surprise, and aggressive prosecution of attacks. The decentralized innovation this encouraged became a hallmark of PT boat culture. Japanese naval responses to the PT boat threat revealed both the Imperial Navy's adaptability and its resource constraints. Intelligence intercepts from December 1943 showed Japanese commands developing specialized counter-PT tactics, including the use of float planes to illuminate target areas, deployment of faster patrol boats specifically designed to hunt PT boats, and modification of convoy routes to avoid narrow passages where PT boats operated most effectively. These countermeasures achieved limited success primarily because Japan's shrinking industrial capacity couldn't produce sufficient specialized vessels to protect all convoy routes simultaneously. The strategic calculus underlying Pacific War logistics meant that every Japanese vessel diverted to anti-PT boat duties represented one fewer vessel available for offensive operations or strategic transport. By forcing Japan to allocate destroyers, sub-chasers, and patrol craft to defensive convoy escort, PT-BOT operations consumed Japanese resources disproportionate to the actual number of vessels sunk. This indirect attrition, forcing the enemy to expend resources countering a threat rather than pursuing offensive objectives, exemplified economy of force principles that military theorists had articulated but rarely achieved in practice. Lieutenant Commander Bulkley, who had initially commanded PT boats during the Philippines campaign and had evacuated General Douglas MacArthur from Corregidor in March 1942, returned to the Pacific in December 1943 as an advisor on PT boat operations. Bulkley's combat experience from the war's early desperate days, combined with his subsequent service in the European theatre, provided valuable perspective on how PTBO doctrine had evolved. His observations, compiled in a report to the Chief of Naval Operations, emphasized that PTBO effectiveness depended critically on aggressive leadership at the boat commander level. Junior officers willing to accept risk in exchange for tactical advantage. This emphasis on junior officer initiative represented a broader cultural shift within the wartime Navy. Pre-war naval doctrine had emphasized rigid adherence to fleet commanders' instructions, with initiative discouraged except among senior officers. PT boat operations by necessity inverted this hierarchy. Boat commanders operating in darkness far from higher headquarters had to make instant decisions affecting life, death, and mission success. The Navy's willingness to delegate tactical authority to lieutenants and lieutenant commanders in their 20 seconds reflected both practical necessity and recognition that the war's scale required distributing decision-making authority more widely than peacetime practice allowed. The human cost of sustained PT boat operations became increasingly apparent as the campaign progressed. Between October and December 1943, Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3 alone lost 7 boats, and 43 crew members killed or missing in action. Some losses resulted from enemy action, but mechanical failures, navigation errors, and simple exhaustion contributed significantly. PT boats operated in conditions that tested both material and human endurance limits. Tropical heat that fatigued crews before missions even began. Mechanical systems requiring constant maintenance in corrosive saltwater environments, and operational tempo that allowed minimal rest between patrols. Medical officers assigned to PT boat bases documented health issues specific to this service. Hearing loss from prolonged exposure to high-decibel engine noise, spinal problems from constant pounding in rough seas, and psychological stress from sustained combat operations. The Navy implemented several interventions attempting to address these problems, including mandatory rest periods after specified numbers of missions, improved sound dampening in crew quarters, and rotation policies ensuring experienced crews received periodic leave in rear areas. These measures helped, but couldn't eliminate the fundamental reality that PT boat duty remained extraordinarily demanding. The tactical innovations that made Wolfpack operations successful also increased coordination complexity and created new failure modes. During a November 28 attack on a Japanese convoy northwest of Buwa Island, communication breakdown between PT boats resulted in 2 boats firing at the same target while ignoring other vessels, reducing the attack's overall effectiveness. Post-mission analysis identified the problem. Boats lacked standardized procedures for dividing targets once contact was made. Squadron commanders developed target allocation protocols addressing this gap, but the incident illustrated how successful tactics created second-order challenges requiring continuous refinement. Intelligence collection became increasingly sophisticated as the campaign progressed. Coast Watcher networks expanded to include native scouts who observed Japanese installations and movements, reporting via radio to Allied headquarters. Some scouts paddled canoes dozens of miles to observe convoy departures from Japanese-held harbors, then transmitted detailed information about vessel numbers, types, and departure times. This intelligence, combined with aerial reconnaissance and signals intelligence from coda-reeking operations, gave PT boat commanders unprecedented awareness of enemy intentions. The intelligence infrastructure supporting PT operations by late 1943 represented a mature system integrating multiple collection methods. Commander Warfield's operational analysis, completed in December and forwarded to Admiral Halley's headquarters, quantified PT boat effectiveness during the October through December period. His report documented 43 pints boat attacks against Japanese convoys, resulting in 19 confirmed vessel sinkings, 12 probable sinkings claimed but not photographically confirmed, and 28 damaged vessels forced to undergo repair. Against these results, American forces had lost 9 PT boats with 72 personnel killed or missing. The exchange ratio, 19 confirmed enemy vessels sunk for 9 PT boats lost, represented a favorable outcome, but Warfield emphasized that success depended on maintaining technological and tactical advantages that Japanese forces were working diligently to counter. The report also addressed a more subtle metric: deterrent effect. Japanese convoys increasingly avoided waters where PT boats operated, accepting longer routes that consumed more fuel and time. Some high-value convoys received destroyer escorts disproportionate to their cargo's worth, diverting those warships from offensive operations. Warfield estimated that PT boat operations had reduced Japanese supply efficiency to the Bougainville garrison by approximately 40%, not through vessels sunk, but through operational changes forced by the PT boat threat. This deterrent effect, difficult to measure but strategically significant, justified PT boat operations, even on nights when no enemy contact occurred. Public perception of PT boat operations evolved as censorship restrictions gradually relaxed, and media outlets published accounts of successful actions. Magazine articles in Collars and the Saturday Evening Post romanticized PT boat crews as devil boats and mosquito fleet warriors. Language that emphasized the asymmetry between small American boats and large Japanese warships. These accounts served propaganda purposes, bolstering American morale and international perception of U.S. military effectiveness. They also created recruitment appeal. Volunteer rates for PT boat duty increased significantly following publication of these articles, though few volunteers fully understood the danger and hardship the duty entailed. The Navy's official historian, Samuel Eliot Morrison, visited Tulagi in December 1943 to gather material for his planned comprehensive history of U.S. naval operations in World War II. His interviews with PT boat commanders and crew members captured perspectives that formal after-action reports often omitted: the fear before missions, the exhilaration during successful attacks, the guilt some felt about killing enemy sailors, and the bonds between crew members that transcended normal military relationships. Morrison's eventual narrative, published years after the war, preserved these human dimensions alongside tactical analysis, creating a more complete historical record than official documents alone could provide. By January 1944, the Solomon Islands campaign had reached its conclusion, with American forces securing Bougainville and effectively isolating the massive Japanese base at Rabaul. PT boat operations had contributed significantly to this outcome by strangling Japanese supply lines and forcing their garrisons to subsist on diminishing resources. The tactical doctrine developed through trial and error in the Solomons now became doctrine exported to other theaters where similar conditions existed: narrow waters, restricted channels, and Japanese forces dependent on seaborne logistics. General Douglas MacArthur's Southwest Pacific Command requested assignment of additional PT boat squadrons to support operations along New Guinea's northern coast. MacArthur, who had been evacuated by PT boat from Corridor and retained positive views of their capabilities, envisioned using them to interdict Japanese barge traffic, supplying isolated garrisons that regular naval forces couldn't economically engage. This mission differed from Solomon Islands convoy attacks. Japanese barges displaced mere hundreds of tons rather than thousands and carried supplies rather than major cargo. But the fundamental principle remained constant: small, fast craft attacking at night in confined waters, where their speed and agility compensated for light armament. Lieutenant Commander Harley received orders transferring him to MacArthur's staff to help establish PT boat operations in New Guinea. The assignment recognized both his tactical expertise and his ability to interface between the freewheeling PT boat culture and traditional military command structures. Harley arrived at MacArthur's headquarters in Brisbane in February 1944 and immediately confronted challenges distinct from those he'd managed in the Solomons. New Guinea's geography featured longer coastlines with fewer natural choke points, requiring different tactics, emphasizing patrol endurance over ambush positioning. The doctrine Harley developed for New Guinea PT operations incorporated lessons learned in the Solomons while adapting to new conditions. Instead of establishing static ambush positions, New Guinea PT boats conducted roving patrols along known Japanese barge routes, using radar to detect contacts and coordinating with Army Air Force's P-40 fighters, providing air cover during twilight operations. This combined arms approach represented doctrinal evolution. PT boats no longer operated in isolation, but as components of integrated systems involving air, surface, and intelligence assets, working toward common objectives. Technical improvements continued enhancing PT bot capabilities throughout 1944. New radar sets provided more reliable detection at longer ranges, reducing the visual sighting dependence that had limited night operations. Improved radio equipment enabled voice communication with better clarity and resistance to atmospheric interference. Some boats received experimental rocket launchers as alternatives to torpedoes, recognizing that many targets didn't justify expending scarce torpedo inventory. These modifications accumulated incrementally, each addressing specific operational shortcomings identified through combat experience.